This right here. All right, we're on. We're live. We are here. Welcome. Those of you who just want to give a few seconds here for people to file in. They're going to get notified about this very important conversation that was brought on from a Facebook Live post that I did last week or 2 weeks ago. There was such a response that it warranted me to ask somebody who I consider an expert in this. So I wanted to welcome, for the very, very first time ever, I've interviewed a ton of people. I've had a ton of people come on, and we do interviews. I've been interviewed by a lot of people, my clients that come into our program. But it is an absolute honor for me to finally have, it was time that I had invited Amanda to come and join us to talk about this very important conversation. So Amanda, welcome.
Thank you.
Just FYI, just to let you know, we are at a Starbucks in Kauai, and hi. So I can turn the camera around, we're on our laptops, and we are actually talking to each other, and she's sitting right over there. And so this is the best way that I know how. And it's this is the first time. It's a unique thing for me. So I did want to welcome you, and my partner, my main squeeze, business COO of my company. I don't know, the person who keeps me in alignment, the person who I can't do it without. It is, I'm super duper grateful to be having this conversation with you. So I'm glad to have you here, hon.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So what I wanted to do was to start off by talking about why we're having this conversation is because for those of you who don't know who I am, who we are, my name is Dr.Nima Rahmany. I'm a chiropractor who has now retired from full-time practice, and I go into a part-time chiropractic practice, but full-time in traveling the world and facilitating live trainings and workshops, as well as have an online program community, actually, of people who, it's called the Powerfully Aligned Mastermind, of people who are actually aspiring leaders who are sick, stressed, and stuck and want to get powerfully aligned in themselves, clearing freedom from anxiety, power, freedom, full self-expression, healing from all sorts of disorders that I discovered emotionally was the root cause. And I've been, frustrated at the fact that as a chiropractor, I wasn't really getting to the underlying root cause, which was mindset and the way that we see the world and live. And so I created this program, and Amanda is now not only one of the coaches in the program, she's also the COO of the company, operating officer. And the reason why I never dreamed of having a conversation about this topic, but the participants in our program who are struggling with anxiety, who are feeling a lack of power, a disconnection in their relationships, they come to us for help because we get them back into their power and having great relationships again. What we discovered through the unpacking process is how common this whole concept of past trauma, past sexual trauma, infidelity, all sorts of conflicts around sexuality. And who better to talk about, hey, Sylvie, what's up? Who better to talk about this with than Amanda, who I consider somebody I can look up to when I'm having questions about these types of conflicts, because she's lived them, she's experienced them, she's helped, she's done the work on them. She has no emotional charge about anything pertaining to sex whatsoever, which is probably why I was attracted to her in the first place, because I'm kind of the same way. I'm a little bit messed up in that way, is that I'm able to look at them from a non-charged perspective, as I've done the work on my past traumas and sexualities and whatever stories that I've had. So Amanda, I would love for you, first of all, I would love for you guys, if you're watching, to definitely participate with us and engage. The likes, the hearts, please please tag somebody that you know really needs to be included in on this conversation. And would you please also hit the share button, because this is a conversation that people are too afraid to have. And there's a trigger warning here as well for those of you. So Amanda, could you please talk a little bit about, I'm going to start off by talking about, not about blame, but I'd like to talk about responsibility. What happens in a relationship, because we're going to use just generalizations, this goes men and women. What happens to a person, man or woman, when they enter a relationship and they haven't resolved their sexual trauma from their past? What happens? What have you noticed?
Well, what I've noticed, two things very specifically. One, they're going to consistently be attracting opportunities to heal the past in their relationship in the form of conflict and even potential more trauma.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so well, I mean, as you know, in our work, whatever you haven't loved is seeking to be loved, and so anything you haven't done the work on presents itself in any dynamic. So it can be a social dynamic, it can be a romantic relationship, it can be a marriage, it can be a friend, like it can be a friendship, it can kind of show up anywhere. But anything you haven't resolved from your past period will show up to be worked on. And where better for that to show up than your romantic relationship or around the person you're spending the most intimate time with. So that's like, it's inevitably going to show up, and it's going to show up in the person that you're choosing to date, either casually or long-term at the time. So that's what I mean by that.
All right, thank you. Kelly is letting us know that there's a lot of echo and feedback, hard to hear. This is the unfortunate first world problem. This is the
it's not me mumbling.
It's not you. This is the unfortunate first world problems of having to do Facebook Live. Really relying on technology here. Our Airbnb's Wi-Fi was not good, so we had to seek out the closest Starbucks. So we're literally at Starbucks in Kauai. Poor us, first world problems. So if you're having a tough time hearing, please let us know. Also, we'd like to know in the comments section where you're signing in from, where you're tuning in from. Please engage with us. If you have any questions, any ahas, anything like that, please, we'd love to hear it. So please, Amanda, go ahead. What you were saying, you were actually on a really cool train of thought before I interrupted you.
No, no problem. And then the second thing I was going to say, where it shows up, I see, I was wondering if this was going to happen. So they're getting feedback because of...
Yeah, because we're so close,
because of how close we are.
Okay, let me go inside. How about this? Let me go inside. Perfect, thank you.
Everybody at Starbucks is going to get a show now.
Starbucks is going to be handling this conversation, so pardon the noise here. All right, so go for it. Yeah. All right.
And the second thing I've noticed is that if we're not privy to that fact that things are going to show up and that there are an opportunity to do the work on it, we will typically choose relationships that we think will actually heal us. But we think that they're going to inevitably just heal us, like by sleeping with someone different or someone who has a different frame of thought or someone we perceive to be better than the perpetrator. Let's use that phrase. Then we get into this relationship. We're infatuated in the beginning. We think the person's going to heal us just by osmosis of being physical or intimate or around them. And 100% of the time, that doesn't happen.
Kind of like, finally, this asshole, I'm out of the life of this complete asshole. I found my hero. I found the one that's going to rescue me and save me. And then what do you notice happens?
Well, it's like we have this belief that we can undo it by redoing it with someone new, but that doesn't work. Then over time, inevitably, we create resentment toward our partner because the expectation we had getting into the relationship to resolve our sexual trauma is not being met. So then resentment definitely gets built. So that's the second part where it's going to be impacted. And then we just get stuck. We get stuck in this cycle of you should be fixing me, whatnot. But then also what happens is, this is a topic that's really, really heated for me because what comes to mind anytime I have a conversation about this, typically private conversation or with my clients, is the number one most powerful thing you can do for your relationship is to do the work on your sexual trauma and not expect it to be solved by your partner. So if you go into a relationship knowing you have something in the background and you're not willing to look at it or face it, that's a huge disservice to your partner.
Yeah. That's one of the things that spurred on this conversation was we were talking about some case studies that we're working on. And what we found was that there was this relationship dynamic going on where there was no sexuality. So one of the symptoms of unresolved past sexual trauma you might see in your relationship is an inability to really connect to yourself sexually, inability to be able to have a loving, vulnerable sexual experience with your partner.
And it's an infatuation resentment cycle. So in the beginning, a lot of people will feel so good physically with someone new, and they're like, wow, this is completely the opposite of what I dealt with growing up if it was an incest or a rape or whatever. And they get overly infatuated with it, but then over time the trauma is still there, the physiological response to the partner slows down, and then all of a sudden the blame kicks in, like, hey, wait, what? I thought it was cured, but it's really just an infatuation resentment cycle.
Exactly. And the thing that spurred on this Facebook Live was when we were in the car together and you turned to me and you said, oh, this is what you were like, pissed off. You were like, a woman has no right to complain about having bad sex with her husband if she hasn't done the work on resolving her past sexual trauma.
100%.
I was just like,
you were like, wow.
I was like, what did you just say? And let me repeat that. If you're a woman, for example, or a man with past, this works both ways, but I just want to use what's most common because we see it so often, is that this is what you said, and I'm quoting you. This was brilliant because it's like, wow, is that if you're a woman who has had unresolved past sexual trauma, then you haven't done the work on it. But by work, not going to a counselor and being, supported in your story. By work, I mean really understanding the dynamic of why what happened and your role in it. Not to say that there's victim blaming or anything, but really to find the gifts of it. You haven't really done the work on it, the deep work, the deep work that we do on it. Then you have no right to complain about bad sex with your partner. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think you pretty much summed it up, but a lot of times I've heard of female conversations where girls will be complaining about their sex life, and inevitably what can be uncovered is an unresolved sexual trauma. Either the woman did something to someone, because women absolutely are, at fault of being the perpetrator as well, or something was done to them. Yeah, absolutely, the predator.
I like to use the term predator and prey because it's not masculine or feminine. Either way can go either way. We'll use predator and prey. So, yeah.
And they expect, and so they're complaining about their sex life with their girlfriends. But what they're not actually talking about is that they haven't taken responsibility to actually do the work or heal any of their sexual trauma in the past, which they're inevitably bringing into the relationship.
Beautiful.
Complaining about your sex life doesn't do anything about it.
Can you talk a little bit about, because we work with men a lot too in our program, we work with a lot of men, and the fact that a lot of women, especially the ones who still feel victimized by something unresolved in their past, there was something that happened, there was predator-prey dance that they haven't yet gotten complete with, and all of a sudden they're in a relationship, and then the man is trying to be physical and sexual, and then he gets shut down, and then that feeling of rejection. What I've observed is that women who subordinate as the prey don't get that men who had been in that situation, who were in that situation with them, were also the prey of a previous unresolved sexual trauma within their own lives, and that they're looking at all men like that, and they don't see that them shutting down sexually is a form of rejection for men.
Are you talking about like what happens in a relationship if a woman does have a sexual trauma that she's not dealing with, so she shuts down? Like what men deal with in that situation?
Exactly.
Well, here's the irony. Typically, it's an incest or a rape, or if that's the case, it's typically a situation where the female was the prey, and she's consistently repeating what she thinks should have happened, which is "fuck you, no, go away." And then that plays out in her relationship. So she's consistently rejecting the male, if it was a male, to try to solve the past trauma.
Bingo. I just want you to get that, guys, and really see what this opens up for you, is that the impact of unresolved sexual trauma is a disassociation and a block sexually as an attempt, an unconscious attempt to regain power and domination over a past perceived prey type of scenario. In other words, what you were saying is a woman is not allowed, or a man who previously have been prey are not allowed to complain about bad sex if they have not done the deep work on their previous sexual trauma. This is huge. And the thing is that we get that this is a very highly triggered type of conversation that we don't, but the problem is we're not having them. We're not having these types of conversations.
No.
And what I've observed is that right now, as a result of the Me Too campaign, where women, I mean, it's beautiful. Like, I really want you to get how I'm so glad that it came out, because people who have been in hiding, people who have felt ashamed to even speak up, have seen that they're not alone. And that brings them a state of relief. And that's starting a conversation. That's wonderful. I'm talking about how the pendulum swings so far to the Me Too, where they're going into detail about their sexuality and their anger and resentment. The outcome that we are actually interested in, that all I care about as far as outcomes go, is healing. And by repeating past stories of victimhood doesn't actually promote healing. It actually creates further separation and divide. And once we understand the dynamics, I'm not saying and justifying that this behavior is okay. I'm just saying I'd rather look at the dynamic and understand it so that we can create conversation and actual healing. And that's really what the whole goal is about. And so women don't get how difficult, and ingrained as a child, this whole concept of rejection can be. So if you take a man, or we're talking about the breeding of a predator, and you take a person who's never, and I think what we can all agree on is what breeds this whole process is not talking about it. In other words, you're not supposed to be talking about sex. All these urges and desires that you've had growing up, you're not allowed to have them. Please hush. Do not talk about it. You're not supposed to talk. Please, don't talk about, those desires. You're supposed to suppress them. So we have this consistent culture of suppression, whether it be through religion or society or whatever, and we're not talking about it. And then you take somebody who has completely been disempowered by an abusive situation in himself. He's now in a disempowered state. And now you have this environment where you have a potential sense of power. He could be acting out that unresolved thing in that moment. But when we say Me Too, making them wrong, or calling them assholes and labels and all of this stuff, we are discounting and discrediting the fact that that person actually, there's a reason why they got to that situation. And by making them wrong and shaming them doesn't actually create healing. It creates a further divide. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, I definitely want to talk about the shame part. So what happens is, and again, this is in my personal experience, and then what I've seen in working with people and just in conversation with people, is especially if there's a shame involved. One of the things that happens is a lot of times, and I don't know, hopefully this isn't going too far out there. If there's a shame or a guilt involved, either because something happened to you and there's a part of you that actually liked it and you're feeling insanely shameful about it, or you did something to someone and obviously you're feeling shame about it, you will inevitably seek out a repeat of that situation, either in fantasy form or real, to experience yourself not as a bad person.
And hence the subculture of domination, submission, fetishes.
Exactly. So like inevitably, if you're repressing doing the work on it, it's going to express as a consistent, obsessive fantasy or fetish that you can't stop thinking about, which is another opportunity that's coming towards you to love it.
And from your experience, what are the most common of those entanglements that you see acting out and playing out in that kind of sexual world?
Well, I mean, I think one of the number one, you can just look at, just look at porn. If all you got to do is look at the most popular search different porn situations. There's, old and young, either old male, young female, or either old female, young male, which is going to be playing out some sort of a parent-child dynamic from the past.
Parent-child dynamic, yeah, or uncle.
Uncle. Family, like it's a family. It's a
some sort of a conflict.
There's a family dynamic.
Yeah, a shame or a guilt or a confusion in that dynamic. Yep.
Or a dominant reversal, like a dominant role reversal. So the prey wants to dominate and be the predator.
Bingo.
Or even if it's a rape, it'll become a rape fantasy to try and actually resolve the rape itself, or the person may fantasize about raping others, but then they're living in shame of even having that fantasy. Then they're also living in shame of having the same thoughts that they perceive that their predator had towards them. I mean, it becomes a complete web of tangled thoughts and feelings.
Totally.
And then nothing kind of gets resolved. You know, there are outlets out there for healing sexual trauma through actually consensually living out the trauma with someone who you share your trauma with, and then you ask if they'll actually live it out with you so that you can go back in and heal it.
Can you give examples? Can you give examples?
Rape for sure. Like there, rape or daddy-daughter fetishes. Like you can actually hire sexual healers to, like I said, consensually
act out what you've been
repressing, or to bring consent into that thing you perceive you didn't have consent in the past.
Yeah.
It's just another form. It's another way that people try to work on healing their sexual trauma, which is actually a very powerful way to do it. But it usually ends up as a very, very extreme expression of it, like a last resort, if you will. People going outside of their marriages to work with dominatrix, going outside of their marriages to work with different sexual healers in an attempt to still try to resolve the guilt and shame because we're not talking about it.
Because we're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah. Yep.
Because
which then, of course, brings up the whole world of infidelity.
Bingo was my next conversation. Infidelity is, in my opinion, infidelity is the acting out of a truth we don't really want to share with each other, like sharing each other's fantasies. Oh my gosh, if I tell you, for example, that's why in my relationship with you, I'm like, okay, so what are your fantasies? What do you want? And you're constantly like, so what are they for you? As effed up as they are, I want to know, because if I want to protect the relationship from infidelity, if I deny you your fantasies, or I make you wrong, or I make you feel guilty about them, they're still there. And chances are you're a human being and you're going to want to act them out somehow. So I'd rather be the one that gives that to you. And so this is why it's so important to be continuing. It is really to be having that conversation. The goal and the intention that I had set of this Facebook Live post, other than to expose everyone to the loud noises of Starbucks and scare the crap out of all the
Starbucks customers,
facepalm Starbucks and Kauai, is to actually start the conversation. Because I'm going out on a limb here and saying that this is way more common than you think. I'm going way out on a limb here and saying that any problem that you're having in your relationship right now, if you want to have a deeply connected relationship with your partner, it involves you having a deeply connected relationship with your past, and the victim state that you've been carrying has probably got you certain so far. But what we are all about, the vision and mission that we're all about, is to help you break free of that and gain and find your power. Because the common story of past sexual trauma that is a complete lie that we've observed consistently over and over again was that you were powerless in that moment, that you had no power, that you were powerless, that you were weak, that you were all of those things. That is the most consistent lie that is actually perpetuating a state of dis-ease and dysfunction in self, which then spills over into the relationship. And what are the symptoms of that? A shitty sex life, shame and guilt, constant hiding, or if you've allowed it to go long enough, God forbid, you've allowed it to go long enough, you're now exhibiting symptoms in your reproductive organs, infertility, cramps, like really bad cramps, endometriosis, all of these stories, they're not just medical issues. This is why I left my chiropractic practice full time, was because I kept seeing these things. I listened to the stories, and it's all unresolved sexual trauma. So I created the overview method and these workshops so that people can come and talk about it openly. And it was so funny because we had a guy I wanted to share, one of the participants in the overview experience in Brisbane. who was a male who was a victim to a past sexual molestation. We discussed it openly, and at the end of it, he shed tears because it was the first time, number one, he started talking about it openly, and number two, he realized after we were all discussing that his emotional charge was gone and he was set free. He was lighter and he was actually dancing at the end because he was no longer burdened by the shame and the guilt of not having the conversation. And consider the possibility that you not speaking up and voicing it is actually contributing to any illness in your body. And we're on a path to actually set people free.
Yep. And your body's going to communicate what you're not willing to.
Can you say that again?
Your body will communicate what you're not willing to. It'll show up as illness. It'll show up as, frigidness for women. It'll show up in a lack of sexual response or lack of sexual desire for men as well.
Yeah. So what's available is once you do these symptoms of lack of sexual desire, physiological symptoms, disconnection and resentment that's persisting constantly, what's available to you once you get to the other side of that? How would you describe the freedom that you felt? Because, let's use you as an example. Hypotheticals aren't really working. Let's use you as an example. You were date raped. How old were you? What happened? And how did you how can you talk about it without being so charged and like having to break down?
So I was in my early 20s, living in Los Angeles at the time, and I had gotten out of a relationship probably about 6 months prior, a very intense, powerful relationship that I was really, 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 really devastated when it broke up. And I went from monogamous, this is the one wanting to get married, to basically sleeping with everything that came my way. I got into drugs. I started partying a lot. I just was I personally, and again, this is my personal experience. I'm not saying that everybody who's date raped has had it happen this way. But for me, I started to live a wild life. Like I was just responding really negatively, if you will, to the breakup and all of that. And I started to become really infatuated with this guy.
Totally can't relate to you.
No, not at all. I became madly in love with this younger guy who was probably in his maybe 19, 20 maybe, and it was one of those things where everybody around me was like, "This guy, like really?" And I could not get him out of my head. So there was a hyper infatuation with him. I was on a destructive path. I became at his beck and call, and then one night I met him at the bar, and he put something in my drink. And then was like, "Hey, you've had too much to drink. I'm going to take you home. Let's go home." And he took me to a friend's house where there was another guy. And I was actually date raped by 2 people. I guess you would call that a gang date rape. I don't know. But again, I can laugh about it because I've done the work on it. So what I've done is, I used to feel guilt and shame and, oh my God, I should have known. How could I be the kind of person that would let that happen to me? How did I not know they were that kind of person? How was I stupid enough to trust them that they wouldn't put something in my drink? Like I had all of the shoulds going on for sure, the shame, the guilt, whatever. My sex life after that was completely shut down. I didn't trust men. I didn't trust, more than anything, I didn't trust myself, actually, to trust anybody else. And I went through that whole shame and guilt cycle. Even the false, the belief that a lot of women will take on of, what did I do to deserve it and all that. I went through all of it. And when I actually, did the work that we do on it and really pieced it apart and looked outside of just what happened and what was going on in my life at the time, after that happened, I had a huge wake-up call. I stopped doing drugs. I got right back on my career path. I was done sleeping around. I wasn't going to the bar spending money on alcohol anymore. I wasn't even going to the bar. So for me, when I went back and did the work, I discovered, holy shit, I at the time was in need of a huge wake-up call. And the guy was already treating me like shit, and I wasn't seeing it. So, it took what it took in my particular circumstance. And I was a hard ass at the time. Like that is relative to my life at the time is my point. But I looked at it from an overview, if you will. I looked at it from seeing the dynamics at the time. I had left a relationship where it was a certain dynamic and I wanted freedom. And so I had freedom. And the guy that I was with before was older. So then I went younger. Like all the pieces of the dynamic were there when I stopped to look. But the number one thing that I totally owned it. I owned.
Hold on. There are some people that are watching that are going to say, does that mean you asked for it? You asked to be raped? You asked to be, like, how would you respond to that?
When I say I owned it, it means in our work, it means I did the work on it. I took the time to look at the circumstance, to look at how I was being human, to look at how he was being human, to look at what else it would have taken to snap me the hell out of that situation that I was in, the self-destructive pattern I was in. See, I wasn't aware of how self-destructive I was being, so I enlisted someone to be self-destructive to me, to be destructive to me, so that I could wake the fuck up. You know, and not a lot of people will get that. You know, we have to understand, you know, in our work, there's a language to the work that we do. There's a methodology to the work that we do. So part of this might be challenging if you've never done the work for to hear, because you won't be familiar with our phrasing. But when I say owning it, I mean like really go back in and own my side of the dynamic, not my fault or that I deserved it, but my side of the dance. Because there was 3 of us in that case, but there's 2 people in a dance. And who was I at the time that had that show up in my life, or what was going on around me? You know, in the case of when you're younger, and if it's in a family dynamic, you have to look at the family dynamic, like what's happening between mom and dad. What's the environment that everybody grew up in? You know, what's the level of repression in the household? What's the level of expression in the household? Like when we don't take the time to look at those, and we just look at the predator as like this evil person.
Exactly.
It's like we're tunnel visioned as to what's actually going on in the big picture.
And that blocks our healing, and it blocks our ability to prevent things from
right. And if we're tunnel visioned, then we're going to be tunnel visioned on blaming who's right in front of us, which shows up in our partners.
And it messes up our current relationships because we haven't gone back.
Right.
Amanda, I just wanted to tell you how grateful I am that you shared that. Very brave. There, as you can tell, you guys, if you were watching her, you can rewind the tape and just watch. She's explaining a story and sharing it in a way that we can be touched and moved and inspired. And the intention behind me having her on was because I could sit here and talk till I'm blue in the face, but I'm a man and I haven't gone through what she's gone through. But I get to see and bear witness to other people's transformations. And many people aren't really brave enough to be able to share like that. But my goal is to awaken people. Instead of the whole Me Too campaign, I'd like to propose a different one that's #FindYourPower. As you can see, sitting before me here is a very powerful woman who isn't playing victim to her past. And if she were to see her perpetrator, I mean, like I keep saying, is that by forgiving someone, we're still kind of putting ourselves in a position where we're not honoring and owning our part. I think I've lost Amanda right here. I think her battery just went out. So unfortunately I lost her, but I'm so glad that we got her to share exactly that. Unfortunately, you have to see my face for the rest of it. But I really wanted to close with this. It's not about blame. It's about finding your power. And I'm speaking to you if you've been feeling stuck in a limbo in your relationship and you know full well that there's something you haven't yet unpacked. It might not be sexual trauma, it might be some sort of a physical one, or it might be an event that happened with your in-laws. But without unpacking that, it completely creates a disconnection in your current relationships. And if not worked on, it actually creates a breakdown in the cells of your body. I've seen it as a practitioner of the healing arts for the past 16 years. And why I left my structural chiropractic practice was to help people adjust above Atlas, was because I saw the transformations that were available, like in Amanda's case. If you are feeling like you've been blocked and you know that there's a disconnection that you haven't yet completed, reach out. I would love to chat with you. We would love to chat with you and to see if you're ready. November 18th and 19th, we have about 2 or 3 spots remaining for the Overview Experience Vancouver. And we're going to be in London, UK, for those of you in Europe who are tuning in, December 2nd and 3rd, where we will teach you in live training in our community how to get powerfully aligned and find your #FindYourPower. Not victim blaming, not saying that it's your fault or anything. It's really about what's available to you when you find your power and you do the healing. So there she is. She's back in. So I was just saying, is there any last kind of thoughts or words that you had for everybody who are feeling stuck in their relationships and they are just not having a good time sexually? what would you say would be their next step?
The next step is to stop looking at the person in front of you and start looking at the person in the mirror for the cause of your relationship challenges in the bedroom.
And you heard that here first, so you could take your own advice on that one,
I know,
too.
you're going to hold me to it.
Take your own advice on that. Anyway, I'm so grateful that you joined us. I know that you have maybe 3 or 4 people that you know that really needed to hear this message from this lovely, badass, powerful warrior who has really, I wish I could spout off the names of the people that we've been able to serve and teach and share this work with, who've transcended their victim story and they're become powerful. But that's for them to do. And if you are one of them and you love to share your story, please share in the comment section below and join the Art of Powerful Alignment Facebook group, because we're committed to continuing this conversation. Me too, her too, and it's more common than you think. And the victim story can change into finding your power if you're ready to find the right guides and the right people to guide you through it. And even if you have also been a perpetrator, you've been the predator, and you're watching this and you're feeling the guilt and the shame, I'm here to tell you that there's freedom for you as well, not to justify the behavior, but to actually get you to find ways of loving yourself so that you don't keep spiraling down that shame cycle. God bless you guys. Thank you very much. Are there any questions that you have? I know that there's a lot for you to digest. Please, if you can, just hit the love button as much as possible if you really resonated with this.
Facebook should have a I'm triggered button.
If you have, there's an angry button. If you have an angry button, push the angry button. Let us know if this pisses you off. Send me a private message, and I would love to continue the conversation. There was a lot of people who reached out to me after the original one that I did a couple weeks ago. It was, you're welcome, Kelly, and thanks for the feedback, hon. It was great working with you as well in Toronto and meeting you in person. And this is work that we absolutely love and we've dedicated our lives to. So anybody who comes into our path and into our circle, who joins in this work and really does the deep work, we have absolute love for it. So thank you very much. God bless. And if there are any questions, please reach out. We're here for you. Take care.